Hi there, welcome to another video after so long, and especially in this setup that I'm recording right now. It's my home in my hometown. I'm standing on the roof as I used to record, I guess, 7 years ago. So I just thought to recreate this while I'm here so that I can get a nostalgic feeling. Anyhow, again, location is not the important part. Okay, I have my tablet here in which I have written a kind of rough overview of the whole video, so I'm just referring it to here and there. I hope it's okay for you. But this video is about a topic that I have seen coming to life over years through different conversation with different people, but the seed of it was already there in my logic emotion video. Again, I will heavily refer you to watch that first so that you can get a basic overflow or implementation version of this in the first thought instance that I had. This dealing with diverging dichotomies framework, or D3 framework, that I'm going to talk about basically deals with three elemental things. One is confusion matrix, one is Gaussian distribution, and one is a state flow, or you can like think of it like as an oscillation motion. And based on these three fundamental frameworks, I'm going to talk about the whole structure. So this video is going to be a very general and abstracted logic or philosophy of that whole setup and framework, in which at that time I implied the logic and emotion setup and got that kind of result. I have generalized it because I saw the similar kind of pattern with very other dichotomies that humans have in their life, and also because it is coming continuously in different kind of conversation with me. And again, I'm just trying to minimize redundancy. So this thing is quite systemic with humans or any human process, because humans are designed based on dichotomies. I talked about in my first thought split video of Madhusudhan, the x plus iy nature of reality and all this stuff. So dichotomies is obviously a very fundamental nature to human form. Like the whole existence of dilemma exists because there is dichotomies in human nature and dichotomy in the reality that humans live with based on the philosophy that we have found for ourselves. So it is very important to see them in a very larger perspective, and this is why the whole video is about. I have always talked about the topic that I'm going to talk today in different forms, but I have never articulated it as well as I'm going to do it now. And I really hope that once this gets properly understood by people, then they can put their own different dichotomies, whichever they find, and they can get their own logical system. So basically, I'm trying to do what I'm trying to do in my research, to work on a meta principle or meta logical layer, give you the framework or scaffolding itself, based on which you can generate your own implemented solutions and final solutions. The first thing that you must take care of is that it doesn't really apply to physical processes, or the processes that are not very much human centered, or the processes that are governed by physics. So you cannot apply it to, let's say, day or night. Obviously you need to have that much of common sense that to which things apply. These things generally apply to human processes, or the things that are human life centered or human philosophy centered. In that, it would be the example that I have been trying to give from quite long, that is free will determinism, enchantment illusion, selflessness, these kind of human activities oriented things. Obviously it is there because of evolution. As always, as with most cases, humans have been evolved to do these kind of things in their life. Humans have evolved through a specific process that have brought us to deal with dealing with dichotomies in specific kind of manner. Again, I'm not going into detail, but if you use your own mind a bit, you can probably make a better sense out of it. Human brain has its own specific limitations, and to counter that limitations, our brain generally resort to efficiency method, not to accuracy method. And this is just a way for mind to be efficient while trying to be as accurate as possible. Well, the drive to do all of these things, or to even understand and use this framework, is the classic human exploration things that you want to explore, that humans are capable of, and the things that humans can experience. So that is the central drive, the human exploration thing, or you can say dissatisfaction in general. I personally do it to lead this holistic life that I try to live and strive to be better at, to have all aspects of my life and to get into all nooks and cracks of being human, and be able to experience all of that in a proper amount that I like. One more thing that's very essential when dealing with such kind of dichotomies, that I've also mentioned in my free will and determinism view, that when there's this kind of dichotomies that exist with human processes and human framework, then mostly it's not like you can be in either of the extreme. Let's say with free will and determinism, neither completely you can be free willed and live with those principles, or be deterministic. So once wisdom comes into action, and it can be understood by the amount of distribution or the understanding or the use case of of the extremes of the dichotomies. That is, when does one go with free will, when does one go with determinism. I have talked about this more properly in that video, but same applies to other dichotomies as well: logic, emotion, subjectivity, objectivity, all other dichotomies that humans face. So it can also be applied very properly to this whole framework also, and this framework can also be a thing that you can practice to get proper balance in all of your state, or to get that indifference state, so that you can apply them more properly over your life. As I said in my that video also, that selection of the extreme or of the dichotomies that you're working with can in a way define the amount of wisdom that you have. So like when do you choose free will to do which kind of actions, and when do you use deterministic to do which kind of action, can be a very good representation of the amount of wisdom that you have. And therefore this kind of framework can also be used to gain a bit more wisdom, if you want to call in that sense, to make wisdom a bit more practicable thing and a continuous thing, and can lead to some part of practical wisdom. And if you want to see it philosophically and from the lens of classical literature and all, then I think the best would be the one that I also referred in my previous video, would be the Buddhism right path, or the general solution that is given to a lot of general dichotomies with human, is to find the right or midway path. So this can also be used to reach to that level of right path or midway path in any kind of dichotomy, in any kind of human dichotomy. Again, be careful of that. And even if we just zoom in this human process, then obviously there are angles or things in which applies better than the ones it doesn't apply better. And for this, the thumb rule that I think I can talk about is the amount of divergence between the dichotomies. Like you can think of it like laid down on a spectrum. So if the dichotomies have like 180 degree or more than 90 degree, the more difference that they have, the more opposite they are, the better it can apply, and the closer they get, the less it will apply. The more diverging dichotomies are, the better it will apply to that kind of situation or that kind of human qualities. If you apply it to things like, as I said, logic, emotion in my previous video, or things like free will and determinism that I also made a different video about, then these will apply it way properly compared to if you apply it to things like happiness and pleasure, or happiness and joy, or guilt and regret. Obviously now there is this whole set of debate that what are really orthogonal and what are really diverging, and what's the degree of divergence between elements, because for some people the divergence between pleasure and joy, or joy and happiness, can itself be a very large gap to fill. But yeah, now that's a whole different video. I'm not going to get into that segment of philosophy and logic. It's like, again, it might be a bit subjective for people that which things are diverging at which level, but I guess I'm here talking about epistemologically or ontological diverging dichotomies, not the one that could be diverging to some people in their own subjective experiences. Okay, so out of these three elemental things, the first one, or the most important one, I think, is the confusion matrix here is that I'm talking about. You can see some kind of picture on my screen at this moment, a great help from Gemini. Here x and y can be these dichotomies that I'm talking about. Here x and y are just random variables that I chose. Obviously it can be any of the dichotomies, x, 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 y, y. It can apply differently to every different kind of dichotomies. I will talk about 3 or 4 specific ones in this video, and I think you can also make a sense of how to name things when working with this kind of dichotomies.
The process of figuring out and understanding these intermediate elements of x from the lens of y and y from the lens of x will help you get a broader and holistic understanding of these extremes of these dichotomies, and it will in general help you understand this whole system by yourself, and you will innately understand the meaning of distribution and the state flow.
The second element is, I think, the Gaussian distribution, a standard Gaussian distribution, normal distribution. It can be used both to see variation or distribution of it individually, longitudinally. That is, if you're like applying this kind of framework for an individual person, then you can see the distribution in a longitudinal point of angle or with time frame. How does one express and experience the elements of the confusion matrix over time in one's life? As I guess also talked in my logic emotion video, like being completely logical or being completely emotional, or the distribution is over time. And at the same time, you can also apply it latitudinally over space or over human society. So if you're applying it individually, then it would apply longitudinally, and if you're applying it on a societal level, then it would apply latitudinally. As I talked in my logic emotion video, these framework or this distribution and these numbers are just for reference, just as proxy to talk about this general vague idea. It's not like it will always be this like 30-30 distribution kind of thing, but it will give you a brief idea of more or less. You can think of it like that. Well, the central point of this dealing with dichotomies, I think that it reflects about human individually over time, or about humanity over societal level, is that generally or on majority humans or human is likes to be in this kind of mixed state or not be in any kind of extreme states. In this example that we were using earlier, or like be in complete emotional state, be in completely logical states, we like to be in a state where we have elements of both things, and this can be considered as a fundamental abstraction of the whole logic that I'm talking about. Again, if you want to see it evolutionary, if you want to see it as a general human process, then it comes from the fact that being on the extremes is generally a bit more heavy, a bit more computationally heavy, and a bit more heavy in all reasonable sense in which humans are considered about. Like societally also, it is a bit heavy to be on any extreme side of any kind of human trait. So yeah, this is basically representing how we like to, or we generally tend to come towards a mixture of a state rather than being on an extreme of any kind of dichotomies that we can face. The third thing is obviously the oscillation motion, the what I referred in that video as a state flow. That is basically going from one state or one element of the confusion matrix to the other element of confusion matrix. I am trying my best to not bring the Nash equilibrium and other kind of logics in this video, because I think it will just convolute things too much. And this is generally based on the classic theorem or classic logic of human, that we confuse negation with indifference. Again, that is one of my common quotes, that negation is not indifference. But yeah, generally people do that, they can confuse negation with indifference. Okay, so in the state flow thing, let's assume you're in the xy state. So from that, the motion that you will have is not the xs thing, you will go to yx, like that is doing the negation of your current state, that is the yx thing. And from that you will not go to the closest point of view, that is yy, you will go to the other extreme, that is xx, and then you will come back to this extreme. So this motion that you will follow from xy to yx to xx to yy is just classic oscillation thing. The negation is not indifference thing that human follow on, or in general. Again, when I'm saying humans follow, then I mean on a longitudinal level. You can also apply it to latitudinally, that humanity or society forms on latitudinal level. Again, I'm not going into politics or any kind of societal behavior, sociological behavior, but yeah, being one extremist group, then another extremist group, one political thing, other political thing, but yeah, this is the general thing that they follow.
In my logic emotion video, I very clearly and importantly pointed out that we need a breakdown kind of moment, a very important and significant enough hit in our general life to move from the extreme of the elements, that is from XX to YY domains, and we need an disturbance kind of instance or moment to move between the intermediate elements from XY to YX. This applies to this whole diverging dichotomies itself, but since this is a very generic framework, therefore, the application of the breakdown and disturbance depends upon the intensity of the diverging dichotomies we are dealing with. So, yeah, those elements of breakdown and disturbance do apply, but the intensity and amplification depends upon the intensity and amplifications in the divergence of the dichotomies.
Okay, so let me just give you a bit of an overview of this whole process, of this whole D3. Take the dichotomies that you're dealing with, put them in the confusion matrix and get the four elements x, x, xy, yx and xx. Then plot these four elements on the Gaussian distribution in the one that I have shown, 20, 30, 30, 20. And then the third thing that you can do is to put this in the, again, the oscillation motion logic. I have used pendulum as an example, but you can use the spring or any kind of general harmonic or oscillation motion. So yeah, and then plot them x, 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 y, y, x and y in the oscillation motion thing. The confusion matrix is just serve this purpose so that you can get elements, more elements, you can look into the nuances of the thing. That is the purpose of the confusion matrix, that you just don't live on the extremes or get trapped in the false dichotomy kind of logic, that there's only exist happiness and sadness, but there also exist happily sad and sadly happy kind of like midways, or you can get the nuances. That's the purpose of the confusion matrix. The purpose of the Gaussian distribution is so that you can get the distribution over latitude and longitude. The purpose of the state flow or the purpose of the harmonic motion is that you know how to transverse, or how generally humans transverse from one element to other. The main purpose of this is obviously to get the holistic life thing that I talked about in the initial part of the video, and to get that generally you need to have that kind of indifference to the whole flow or the whole confusion matrix or the whole of the element. So if you'll be too attached to one of the extremes, let's say x, then being y would be a chaotic thing. The point of this oscillatory motion is that once you go through all of these elements and the combination of these elements, then you get a bit more indifferent to the whole dichotomies elements, and you can get a better overview, and that will help you to be holistic, and the whole path that I talked about, the midway path and the right path, that will also talk about. So that is the main purpose of all of these three elements. If the dichotomy that you're dealing with is that intensive for you, but again, just giving the basic framework. This framework is obviously recursive. Most of the things I do are recursive, and most of the things in philosophy about humans are recursive, because human mind is an efficiency machine, and recursion is a very good technique to be efficient. Well, now there is this whole another concept that comes into action that I also talked about in my poem, Disturbing Diverging Dichotomies. I think it is on your screen right now, that there's exist dichotomies between dichotomies. Let's say if you have x and y as two worlds, so there can always exist two other worlds, like the best of both worlds and the worst of both worlds. That is a mixture of both of them in the best way possible and the worst way possible. You need to get in that itself becomes dichotomies, and you need to get in the middle of that. So if you see, like there's two dichotomies, x and y, and there's an orthogonal dichotomy that you can get, like best of both world and worst of both world. And then similar, like again, there's just not two elements or two aspects of life. There's a lot of aspects to life. There can be logic, emotion, objectivity, subjectivity, free will, determinism. Like there's tons of things. So it's like a circular thing. And then there's, in the circular thing, there's this orthogonal thing that's circular as well. If you combine them, if you try to map all of this thing, you will get a sphere kind of thing. That is how I imagine it. I just thought to talk about it. So it's like dichotomies of dichotomies, and the thing that you need to do is kind of find the center of that circle to get a proper balance of states, and that is the whole thing. But again, that is itself a very different video. I think that will require a lot of discussion if I have to talk about it. I think I can better talk about it in a video after this gets properly understood by someone, and discussing that would bring out more insights that I have in that topic. Okay, so now let's come to the example part of this video, or the things that is very easy for a lot of you to understand. I have already talked about logic and emotion in this framework as my original thoughts in one of my other videos. Like it's a very classical video, like very old video. I've also talked about this thing in context of free will and determinism somewhat. You can also see that video, volition or something is the name of that. It can be applied to, again, as I said, any kind of dichotomies that are diverging a significant amount, and that can be animalistic and humane nature of human. Like a human is equal to animalistic part and a humane part. It can also be applied to the dichotomies of enchantments and illusion. In Hindi it is called Moh and Maya, to the ones who care. It can also be applied to that. And it can also be applied to selfishness and selflessness, very properly applicable there because they are very diverging. And again, I'll talk about it in the three specific contexts of happy and sad, subjectivity and objectivity, and karm and phal, because again I think these are the ones that I have talked most to most amount of people, and I think this can give a proper idea and at the same time directly be useful to a lot of people if they are looking for an implementable, executable solution rather than the whole framework thing and all. Okay, so all of these examples that I'll mention right now, I will try my best to not go very deep into any of them because it will make a very detailed video of its own. Because when these elements of diverging dichotomies intersect, they creates a lot of nuances that takes very proper care and attention time to like peel layer by layer. So I'll just give you implementation of those dichotomies in this framework, and I'll not go into the detailing of each element or how does this interact or how it can be seen in society and all the other angles. I'll just try to put it into framework and give you a basic overview of the framework. Okay, so applying it with the happy and sad, again very diverging dichotomies, I think this will give you a better idea. So the confusion matrix part, xx, xy, yx, yy. Here the elements are happiness and sadness as the variable. So it can be happily happy, sadly happy, happily sad, sadly sad. These are the four elements that you'll get from the confusion matrix. This will help you zoom in more on these dichotomies and see and understand your nature and this fundamental nature of these dichotomies. This is one of the points. Again, you can, if you want to go like pro level, you can use these elements sadly, happily, and happily, sadly itself to put as the dichotomies and do it as a recursive thing. But again, I will not like you to go bad, so you can do it if you are that crazy. So now if I have to talk about these elements specifically, then happily sad could be a state in which one is happy in being sad. They are sad, but since they have got that momentum, then they are happy about it. And the sadly happy part could be a converse of that, that you are happy with most of the things, but you are still having sadness because of that happiness kind of thing. In human life, it can be seen as different implementation on a more action level, getting bored, not feeling that thrill, not having that spark, blah blah blah. Again, I'm not going to the engineering part of psychology part of implementation, but yeah, this is the whole idea. I have talked about this thing in one of the articles you can find on my website in the discussion article page, where I have tried to describe these two elements briefly. But again, I would still recommend you to think a bit more about these two elements. What can be a state that is happily sad, in which you are sad but you are happy because you have got inertia, because you like being sad, because being sad is easier than changing yourself enough to be happy. And at the same time, what could be sadly happy, where you are happy, you have like all of the things that you could want, but still you are sad enough with those happiness, you are not that fulfilled in a way or whatever. So yeah, you can just see this thing in your own life. Again, classic examples can be given. Money cannot buy happiness. I think that would come into a sadly happy part based on the societal norms. So I think this will give you a better idea of what do I mean by these two elements. Now coming to the distribution thing. Gaussian distribution for one individual over longitude over time would be having a very small part of life in which you are either very happily happy, or whether you are very sadly sad, like the extreme of sadness or the extreme of happiness. And there will be majority of your life where you're either happily sad or sadly happy. And in this too also there would be like a proper distribution, equal distribution, where you'll be sadly happy and happily sad. Okay, now putting this on the state flow thing, or the harmonic thing, or the oscillation thing, or the pendulum thing, then the 4 states could be sadly sad, happily sad, sadly happy, and sadly sad. And the oscillation, let's say if you start from the happily sad state, then you will go to sadly sad state, and then you'll go to happily happy state, and then you'll go to sadly sad state. Again, the point is not the end goal where you are in the end. The point is the indifference from all of these elements, and being able to see all of these elements, or having experienced all of these elements, so you can be indifferent to them. So yeah, this is how you will generally experience all of these elements. It doesn't matter from where you start, you will have this kind of jumping motion, to and fro motion. So if you start from sadly sad, then you will directly jump to happily happy, then sadly happy, then happily sad. Again, the dichotomies or the jumping would be will have the common amplification depending on where you start. Now, applying it to the other example that we have at this moment is subjective and objective. Putting in the confusion matrix, you'll get subjective, subjective, like the extreme form of subjective, subjectively subjective. The other could be subjectively objective, objectively subjective, objectively objective, or the extreme form of being objective. If you want to dig deeper into these two other elements that are, I guess, new to some people, that is subjectively objective and objectively subjective, then a vague interpretation or rough interpretation that I am coming up at this moment, again, that is not the main point of this video, could be ones who are subjectively objective, or when you are subjectively objective, then that would be a case in which you are seeing objective as a subjective case, that some people are more objective and some people are not more objective, or some cases you need to be more objective and in some cases you don't need to be more objective. And the other case of objectivity subjectivity can be when you objectively think that everything is subjective. The classic example that most people fall into, and I think this is the state in which most people fall into when they're not able to deal with the choices that they have make, or live with a free will situation, is this objectively subjective. Like, subjectivity is a general objective thing. Everyone have their own life, everyone have their own subjective experience, and they make their own choices based on the subjective experience. So yeah, subjectivity is objective. That can be a state that most people live in. And again, the idea is to jump between all of these spaces, to be completely indifferent and be able to live a holistic, balanced life. Putting the Gaussian distribution, then again, mostly humans live on the general thing. So mostly humans either live with subjective objective theory or objective subjective theories, and very rarely they live with at the extreme of the theories. In society also, if you see most of the people, very rarely people are either completely objective or completely subjective, but they have mixture of this thing. Putting it in the state flow method, then you'll get subjective subjective, subjectively objective, objectively subjective, objectively objective. If you are, let's say, I have to talk about me, then I think I would be somewhere in the objectively objective part. Then my general oscillation would generally goes also to subjectively subjective part. Then I'll be coming to subjectively, then I'll go to objectively subjectively part, then I'll come to subjectively objective part, the general state flow. The third example here I am choosing is Karm and Phal. Karm translates to action vaguely, and Phal translates to outcome vaguely, or results. So you can translate it on your own. I will use the term Karm and Phal because that is more natural to me given my Hindi background and my all upbringing and all. So Karm here would mean action and Phal would mean result. And again, putting this into confusion matrix, you get Karm Karm, Karm Phal, Phal Karm, Phal Phal. Example, and it can apply to whatever you want. Karm can be extremely focused on Karm, not going into the philosophical angles or the mythological angles, all of this. Now, the distribution thing, as I already said, most people are generally in society Phal Karm oriented, and then they are Karm Phal oriented, and very rare are Phal oriented, and then even rarer are Karm oriented. But again, the distribution is somewhat 30-30, 20-20, as I mentioned respectively. Again, this can be just example. If you want to dig deeper into that, it will be a lot of things, and OBP, it will all come into action. And as I said in the starting of this example, that I'm not going to dig deep into any of these examples. That's not the point of this video. Now, putting it to the state flow thing, if you are, let's say, generally I have seen people be in the Phal Karm angle, and then you can go from Phal Karm to Karm Phal, and then you can go to Phal Phal, and then you can go to Karm Karm, the classic the motion thing. And again, I have seen this very properly done in the society. So again, I can also see this very properly done with myself. So yeah, it is pretty much empirically proved, I guess, somehow. Well, that is it for this video. I hope you got something out of it, and I hope you can understand this very basic framework in general. I really hope that you don't rely on my further videos about the specific examples and do your own analysis, introspection, observations to get a general idea of this framework and how does it apply to different dichotomies, because again, that is the important part. Practicing math is not so that you know how to get a solution, but you know how to use your logic or how to use rational thinking or step by step algorithmic reasoning. So again, the point of this framework was so that you can get the understanding of this framework and be able to apply it on yourself and don't have to rely on me or any other examples. So yeah, I hope you like this video. It's very long since I made such kind of video, such kind of environment at my home, and I really like doing this. So have a good day. Bye, take care, sayonara. This is what I said in my last video. ऑडियो चेक 1 2 3। इससे तेज़ हम नहीं बोलने वाले हैं क्योंकि मेरा गला भी ख़राब है। इससे तेज़ बोल कुछ फ़ायदा नहीं होगा। जो भी आवाज़ आनी होगी इसी में आ जाएगी। Okay, audio check, final check, because I have found this one to be the best as I thought it would be. If you buy a good micro earphone once, you have benefits of it all life long. फिर भी ये सोचा दिल ने अब जो लगा हूँ मिलने पूछूँ तुझे एक बार हो वियर्ड एस्थेटिक्स वीडियो बने जाएगा ये वाला भी. Okay, final audio check.